Namaskar and welcome you all in HUM Nishad's KATHA, a musical colloquium, episode 2 with Pdt Nayan Ghosh. Pdt Nayan Ghosh, a living legend of Indian classical music, recipient of Sangeet Natak Academy Award in 2014 and incomparable virtuoso, equally dextrous on tabla and sitar, and one of the most erudite and revered musicians in this country of Indian classical music, is here today in conversation with us on the virtual platform of HUM Nishad. It is undoubtedly a great opportunity for musicians, students, and music lovers all over the globe to know about the life, work, contributions, experiences, and musical philosophy of this genius musician and get the rare opportunity to listen to the multifaceted legendary maestro, Pandit Nayan Ghosh. Pandit Nayan Ghosh is sitar maestro for on the 28th April 1956, Pandit Nayan Ghosh received in-depth training in vocal music, tabla and bell in the sitar from his late father, Padmabhushan Pandit Nikhil Ghosh. His elder uncle was the renowned flautist, Pandit Nayan Ghosh, who was regarded as the father figure of North Indian flute. Later, he studied under the supervision of Ustad Ahmed Jan Pandit Prakash Ghosh. He also received training in sitar and vocal music from his father, Pandit Nikhil Ghosh, and later learned Pandit Buddhadev Dasgupta. His first tabla solo broadcast was at the age of 4 in 1960. As an accompanist too, he has supported Pandit Ravi Shankar, Ustad Vilayat Khan, Pandit Nikhil Chatterjee, Pandit Jasraj, Pandit Shiv Kumar Sharma, Ustad Amjad Ali Khan, Ustad Rais Khan, Pandit Buddhadev Dasgupta, Ustad Salamat Ali Khan, Ustad Munawar Ali Khan, and many others. He is currently director of Sangeet Mahabharati in Mumbai and as distinguished guest professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, Mumbai, for their Cell for Human Values. So let's welcome now the living legend of our time, none other than Pandit Nayan Ghosh. Heartiest welcome to HUM Nishad and today's session of KATHA, a musical colloquium.
Thank you.
আপনাকে আন্তরিক অভিনন্দন এবং স্বাগত জানাই আমাদের HUM Nishad-এর এই অনুষ্ঠানে। আর what to say, we are so privileged actually that you have agreed to accept our invitation to spend some time of your valuable schedule with us. On behalf of the entire team of HUM Nishad, I convey our deepest respect, heartfelt reverence, and pranam to you. I would like to request another one.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are privileged. Actually, I would like to request another wonderful Sarod player of our time, dear Anirban Dasgupta, to carry forward the session to be continued with Pandit.
Pranams to Nayan Kaku. I welcome all musicians, music lovers, students and enthusiasts to join us in this unique opportunity to share some of the treasures from the musical life and works of Pandit Nayan Ghosh. But I had the rare opportunity to know him since my childhood. And I have to say that apart from being a genius musician and an outstanding scholar, he's a human being of sterling quality. So once again, pranams to you, Kaku. So without much ado, let me put forward some of the questions that we have for you. You were born in a very illustrious musical family, and what happens in such cases is you hardly know when you start learning music. It starts pretty much with your birth. But when did you really start learning music formally?
That's hard to remember when I started formally. But because being born in a musician's family and with such a strong and rich environment around, and the family background, of course, it's very natural for a child to take to music at a very, very early age, like fish taking to water. So it's hard to remember. Probably, I don't know, if I played my first tabla solo at the age of 4,
Indeed.
which means probably I started learning at around 2.5, maybe. I don't remember now.
So, as we all know that your learning was principally from your towering father and guru, Padmabhushan Pandit Nikhil Ghosh, Nikhil Dadu. So, can you tell us how was his teaching like? What was his teaching style?
He had a very unique style of teaching. On the one hand, he was very traditional, and yet he had a very, very progressive outlook.
Right.
And my talim was most often very spontaneous moments of training. Right. So actual learning, physical learning, face-to-face, one-on-one, with instruments in hand.
Right.
He used to keep a very sharp eye on the way I was imbibing the talim, my retention power,
Right.
recapitulating, revising, practicing with or without instrument all the time. Yeah. So all this was.
Did you oversee your practice? Did you oversee your riyaz?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yeah. Like if I would practice, lock myself up in a room, or he would also come into the room and stand for a few moments and see how I'm practicing and what I'm practicing.
Right.
And wherever necessary, he used to guide me and tell me, no, do this way, not that way, this way, and so on. The most important thing is that he encouraged, his style of teaching was such, he encouraged us to keep our musical window open.
Indeed.
For our own interpretation and improvisation also.
Wonderful.
So, the whole idea was, the focus was on experiencing the joy of music.
Indeed.
And learning was round the clock process for us and with him. Our learning had different situations. I mean, one is with the instrument, one is without the instrument.
Right.
Then even while traveling, for example, when I say we, our, I include my younger brother, late Pandit Rupak Ghosh, the Sarangi maestro, and still younger, my sister Tulika Ghosh, who is a wonderful vocalist.
Indeed.
So all of us either received talim individually at different times or collectively. And, there were wonderful memories, like traveling together abroad.
Yes.
On the flight, he would normally, my father would sit in the middle seat and both brothers on two sides. And his talim would go on either tabla or vocal or khayal or tumri or baul or bhatiyali, whatever. This was a constant process, during layover at airports. There was constantly talim going on. And so including anecdotes from his life and from the lives of great masters. That was always enriching, a very enriching experience. Another thing I remember is whenever the family, he took us on vacations outside, maybe to a hill station or something.
Right.
He would take us to certain points from where you can see a range of mountains, maybe sunset time, for example, and he would sing Rag Shri,
Oh my God.
and ask us to either hum the sa, almost replacing the tanpura, or follow him phrase by phrase.
Amazing.
And there were beautiful moments, seeing the pink sky, the horizon, and the sun setting, and birds coming back,
Oh my God.
returning to their nests, and the natural echo between two mountains. And sometimes there were even clear starlit nights. He would encourage us to sing with open throat, and he said, "Sing to the mountain," he would say. To the mountain in front, And so we learned our Shankara, Darbari, and Adana during starlit nights at these hill stations.
Wonderful.
And what an experience. So even today, when I
mean,
perform,
this takes you to a different level of realization altogether.
In front of my eyes, mind's eye, and it further inspires me every time I handle these ragas. So he took very subtle care to see that we associate our music with nature also.
True. During the initial, you can't hear me? You can't hear. Can you? I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? No. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Hello.
Am I audible now? Am I audible?
Yes, you are. I can listen.
Okay.
Whether Kaku is listening to you or not. Yeah. Okay. Kaku,
Now I can hear you.
Okay, good. Coming back to the period, your learning phase, your formative years. Apart from your father, there were many other musicians who were visiting your household quite often.
Yes.
So, some of these musicians, did they influence your learning, your process of development?
Very much, very much. Starting with my father, as I said, I just told you about the way he gave us talim. Besides that, though I was only 4 years old when my uncle Pannalal Ghoshji passed away, however, his music has been part of me, has been part of us, has been part of our musical thinking, our musical growth, everything. And you know about his music, I don't need to talk about. However, my father's gurus, his first guru was Gurudev Gyan Prakash Ghosh, his second guru was Ustad Amir Hussain Khan Sahab for the longest period, and then Ustad Ahmed Jan Thirakwa Khan Sahab. So Ustad Ahmed Jan Thirakwa Khan Sahab, people refer to him as the Mount Everest of tabla. We were very, very fortunate to have him spend almost a decade in our home. So I got to see him and hear him and learn from him 24/7 for almost a decade. And there are so many things I got inspired by, I learned from him. Of course, my father's talim was the main body of my tutelage, but Thirakwa Khan Sahab also taught me quite a few tabla compositions, and then the method of practice, Riyaz ka tarika, is what I learned from him for tabla. And Thirakwa Khan Sahab, being such a phenomenal musician, not just a tabla maestro, but a complete musician. There are so many asthaya antaras, that vocal compositions that we learned from him. Also, very rare ones, and especially often compositions whose antaras were lost, we got it from him.
Indeed.
You know. And likewise, Ustad Amir Hussain Khan Sahab, though we were very young at that time, so I didn't get really directly to learn from Ustad Amir Hussain Khan Sahab,
Right.
but grew up with him around at my home. And then, of course, Ustad Gurudev Gyan Prakash Ghosh ji, he often, whenever he came to Bombay, he would stay with us, and interactions between him and my father, that was the food for our musical growth.
Right.
And what an institution by himself, you know. And of course, then among other musicians from whom I got quite some guidance. One was the vocalist Ustad Ishtiyaq Hussain Khan Sahab, the eldest son of Ustad Mushtaq Hussain Khan Sahab, Rampur Sehswan. I learned quite a few compositions of their gharana, of Ustad Mushtaq Hussain Khan, of his guru Ustad Inayat Hussain Khan, of his guru Ustad Bahadur Hussain Khan, the Sur Singar exponent. He was a great tarana composer also. I learned rare compositions. Ustad Latafat Hussain Khan Sahab of the Agra Gharana was a friend of my father. They were colleagues. They performed together a lot. Right. So his frequent visits to our home, we used to get opportunities to learn fantastic compositions and ragas from him. Absolutely. Then, well, there were quite a lot of musicians whom I got to learn from. There is another musician, not many know, perhaps almost no one knows today, Ustad Iqbal Ali Khan Sahab. Now, I'll give you a short background of him. He was the son of Ustad Khurshid Ali Khan Sahab of Lucknow, that was a direct lineage of the Bade Muhammad Khan of the Qawwal Bache Gharana. Okay. You know, Bade Muhammad Khan was the inspiration for Haddu Asu Khan, who created the Gwalior Gharana. Right. So Bade Muhammad Khan's lineage, the last person was Ustad Iqbal Ali Khan Sahab. And when I was about 20, he was 95. So I received some beautiful, exquisite compositions from him, bandishes. And then, of course, I should say, we all know about Kumar Bahadur Birendra Kishore Roy Chaudhary, the Prince of Gauripur. He also spent about 15-20 days in our home, and I got to learn the Drupad Ang, the 12-stage alap from him for sitar, and a couple of Drupad compositions. However, substantial talim came after all of them, was from your father, Anirban, Padmabhushan Pandit Buddhadev Dasgupta ji, my second guru in sitar, and the great Sarod maestro, and really a legend by himself. And he, I was very, very fortunate to be very close to him and address him as Dada, though there was a huge age difference. But because he addressed my father as Kaka, so by that calculation, he becomes my Dada. But what a giant of a musician. And I was very blessed to learn exquisite Gath compositions, know more about many ragas. And so this is essentially my talim. All these people I have named also, they come into the theme.
So the content of your performance today, out of these towering musicians who you had the opportunity to come across, out of them, who have actually significantly influenced your style of playing? What do you say about
now? It depends. Let's talk first about the general influence, and then we'll go into tabla and sitar specifically. the inspirations after my father, the next important inspiration was Ustad Ahmadjan Tirkwa, because that was at a very tender age, when, you know, the moldable age, between my age of 11 and 20. That was the age I got him 24/7. So his influence came down very heavily and very telling, in a very telling manner, on my tabla, on my approach, on my technique, on my sound production, on everything in my tabla. You know, it played a big role. And then influences were many others also. Amir Hussain Khan Sahab also, what a fantastic artist, tabla player he was. And influences, practical performing influences were also, sources were Bade Ghulam Ali Khan Sahab, Ustad Amir Khan Sahab, Abdul Karim Khan Sahab, Fayaz Khan Sahab, Ustad Mushtaq Hussain Khan Sahab. These were all sources of inspiration constantly. And besides my father's generation, let's say Ustad Vilayat Khan Sahab, a very strong influence on my sitar, a very strong influence. Nikhil Banerjee, Ravi Shankar ji, also many elements of his musicality, musicianship, Ustad Ali Akbar Khan Sahab. And finally, most importantly, once again, Pandit Buddhadev Dasgupta ji, my Buddhada, he was a very strong influence also in my music. And, you know, there's so many things that played such an important role in my today's sitar playing. And
yes,
you know, sometimes you and I, sometimes when you and I discuss, we talk about your father's influence within the gut, Vilambit gut.
Yes. We will actually come to that in a while.
Actually, I was about to ask you to put some more detail on this legendary figure as your guru, Pandit Buddhadev ji. Yes.
Yeah. Well, first of all, he was a stalwart of a guru. He was a stalwart of a musician. He was a musician's musician, actually. Because those who understood his music and appreciated and loved and admired his music were all very good musicians themselves. So they were the people who followed him. So that's why I call him a musician's musician. And he himself, the talim that he got from Pandit Radhika Mohan Moitra, not only the assimilation of that entire talim, but his own thought process, his own many other insights that he could find, and that enriched his music. His music, finally, within his lifetime, he was able to establish a very original and individual style of Sarod playing. That was Buddhadev Dasgupta, you know, clearly. You know, that was a great achievement for Sarod. And also as a guru, the number of disciples, you know, in Sarod, we all know the contribution of Ustad Alauddin Khan Sahab, the number of disciples he trained. After him, in the next era, I think it's Buddhadev Dasgupta ji, Buddhada, who has trained dozens of young, very able Sarod players and even sitar players. And it is phenomenal. As a guru, his contribution is also, what a clear insight he had in his music. He could articulate that, he could bring it out in his students, and knowing the different students' aptitudes, he also you know, helped them with the clarity of thought, his different students. And that was phenomenal. As a teacher, it's a great quality to understand each and every student individually, their aptitudes, their assets and liabilities, and and training them accordingly. And even to me, when he said, you know, when I started learning from him very late, because in the meantime I had already established as a performer, regularly concert performing, and my father's talim, but he always told me something which no guru so easily shares. He said, Nayan, don't change your music. Your talim is already very rich from your father. Your musicality, your musicianship, let there be no change in it. You take the compositions from me and play it your way, interpret it your way. What a large-hearted guru. Not insisting that you have to play it in this way only. So that really, and having grown up with my father's progressive outlook, this was another big addition to my musical understanding. And I'm very fortunate to have, my father and Buddhada as my gurus.
So, Kaku, you have attained dizzying heights in two complementary disciplines of music. One is sitar and the other is tabla. And apart from that, you got in-depth talim in surbahar and pakhawaj as well. So my question is, having learned so many different subjects in music, how does it really, enrich and add to your musicianship? Or how does it help your musicianship?
Well, it has helped me immensely, in such a wholesome and holistic manner, I'll say. And actually, for several years in the beginning, my talim that I received from my father was in tabla and vocal, both together. They went side by side. So comparatively, sitar I started late, probably age of 11 or 12, when I started taking interest in sitar. I mean, there were 2-3 sitars at home, and I started dabbling with it. And then I started getting really fond of playing sitar, and my father observed that. And then he felt it's time for talim. And so my talim in sitar started. My father had in-depth knowledge of sitar, of instrumental baj, of many other instruments also. Sarod, sitar, sarangi. He had a lot of technical knowledge also, and content also. So he taught me ragas and beautiful guts in different ragas and sitar. And so then that also, so 3 things went side by side: vocal mainly, tabla and sitar. And then occasionally I have played pakhawaj on different occasions. I have even 1 or 2 occasions when I accompanied some Dhrupad singers also. And surbahar, yes. I happened to see a surbahar at the musical store in Bombay, Bhargava's Music, a very exquisite one made by Naskar. And I tried it out there and I loved the sound. So I purchased it. I took it home, and then for weeks and on end, I would be playing surbahar. And so my father, having seen that, and plus his talim, plus the Dhrupad Ang talim from Birendra Kishore Rai Chaudhary and all that together, it started showing expression through my surbahar. So surbahar also became a natural part of my, all these are nothing but extensions of my musical scape.
Expressions.
So, talking of surbahar and talking of sitar, I believe you would agree that the older style of sitar playing had a larger proportion of tantrakari ang content. More bol ang tans, more todas were played on sitar. But as time progressed, now we have a style of sitar playing which is much more oriented towards vocal music. So, given this situation, do you see the need for retaining or preserving the tantrakari repertoire in sitar? Do you think the tantrakari repertoire in sitar is kind of, if I may say, kind of endangered in any respect?
I understand. Yeah. And Well, your concern
Yeah.
for the obsolescence
Right.
of Tantrakari
Yeah.
is really is
Right.
a very valid concern.
Right.
But let me start this way. You know, every instrument has its own language, its own unique
Indeed.
language, and
Right.
every instrument has evolved in different
Right.
ways
Indeed.
over a period of time.
Right.
And over the centuries, great masters have revolutionized the body of content
Right.
from time to time in different ways.
All right.
Talking about sitar, even in sitar or any stringed instrument, for example, today, when we play alap, it is nothing but an extension of Rudrabina or bean playing.
Exactly.
So Drupad Ang is there. So there is already a natural gaiki in it,
Right.
in the alap.
Exactly. Yeah.
And side by side, we cannot forget that sitar already had a very rich and developed language and repertoire.
Right.
You know, thanks to such fantastic contributions by people like Amir Khan Khusro, not Amir Khusro, Amir Khan Khusro,
Right.
his brother Feroz Khan,
Correct.
Masjid Khan, Raza Khan, you know, Rahim Sen, Amrit Sen, Nihal Sen,
Right.
Barkatullah Khan, Bahadur Sen,
Right.
then the Sahabdat Khan Sahab, Imdad Khan Sahab, Inayat Khan Sahab, and
Indeed.
then you have, and
even
then you have
I recall the name of Ustad Mushtaq Ali Khan Sahab. His style of
Mushtaq Ali
playing
Khan Sahab.
had a
Yeah,
lot
that
of
is the
Tantrakari.
Barkatullah lineage.
Right.
Yeah, that's the Barkatullah lineage.
Indeed.
Then I'm talking of the masters of the very past, you know.
Right.
Then you must have heard of Shiva Pashupati, Ram
Yes.
Sevak Mishra, you know, the Banaras, more known as Prasidhu Manohar Gharana. Then the Vishnupur Gharana,
Of course. Of course.
huge contribution. Then Dhaka, Bhagwan Chandra Das, Seni, and many others. You know, there have been so huge contributions of sitar. Already had a very large repertoire, its own language,
Indeed.
highly developed. However, now it is very important for me to mention that Ustad Vilayat Khan Sahab in our times reinforced the sitar content and technique and the instrument itself
Correct.
with an extraordinary measure of the gaiki and lyricism in his music.
Absolutely.
And we all acknowledge his near superhuman virtuosity, tayari.
Absolutely. No doubt.
So this was another huge revolution in sitar that came about. And today, many of the following sitar players after Vilayat Khan Sahab, many of them are following, including myself, of course. I'm pretty much influenced by his style, are playing Vilayat Khan Sahab's Gaiki Ang. But Vilayat Khan Sahab himself did not do only Gaiki. He did have the Tantrakari Ang, because that was the basis, that's the foundation, or that's the plinth on which he grew.
Of course.
You know. So he very judiciously used Tantrakari in his performance. And you'll notice in many of his recordings that once he starts the Gat, and in the process of elaboration, there are beautiful, subtle todas that he executes.
That's correct. And in fact, many of the guts from Imdad Khani Gharana have a very, very deep grounding in Tantrakari itself. The guts there.
Yes. So, of course, in our present times, the younger generation, that is my generation and others, we need to take care to see that the Gayaki and Tantrakari go in a very good proportion.
Exactly.
That's very important. And Tantrakari should not be forgotten, because that's the very identity of sitar.
Exactly.
And that's the very identity of sitar. And therefore, much more content, which was added in the 20th century, ideally, with the inclusion of all these, what I just said, all these different dimensions, it is very important to maintain the original language and the identity of the instrument. That's why todas or gat bharao jisko bolte hain, They are very important.
Exactly.
But ultimately, it's up to the artist's style in what proportion he chooses to,
Execute that.
execute the Gayaki and the Tantrakari ang. And there are also, one more thing, there are also ragas which define the proportion of usage also. There are also ragas which tell you, okay, there's more Tantrakari needed here
Yeah.
to handle me. The ragas tell you.
Absolutely.
And of course, then I should not miss out on the contribution to sitar. Tantrakari is very much seen in Pandit Ravi Shankarji's playing.
Absolutely.
His performances are noted for Tantrakari ang, and not only Tantrakari. His contribution was massive in terms of Layakari,
Indeed.
handling
Absolutely.
many other tals, introducing many other ragas either through the Carnatic system or his own creations, and a tremendous individuality that he created and made the sitar a globally popular instrument. We have to acknowledge these contributions.
Sure.
Nikhil Banerjee.
Yeah.
Nikhil Banerjee was a beautiful combination
Absolutely.
of both the streams,
Correct.
of
Correct.
both Ravi Shankarji and Vilayat Khan. That is Tantrakari and Gayaki both, plus
Exactly.
with strong influence of Ustad Amir Khan Sahab's Gayaki, his music developed a contemplative character.
Yeah, absolutely.
Depth, going into the depths,
Indeed.
a very spiritual approach. And that's so important. That never happened on sitar before.
I mean, that's why, I mean, there was this absolutely unmistakable uniqueness in his style of playing, which is so, that's
Very
what.
unique, very individual, very individual.
Right. And actually, Kaku, talking about this uniqueness, like any, established performer, an established artist should be looking out to develop an idiom or a style of his own. So my question to you would be, like in your case, or like for that matter, for any other artist, should this be a very conscious process, or is it something more subtle, or is it something like more subconscious things that automatically happens once the performer attains a certain level of, ability and perception?
Are you talking about individuality, originality?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Creating or developing one's own style. Right.
Yeah. Now, actually, your question itself has the answer in it.
Right.
Because, as you said, it takes time.
Right.
One cannot make a conscious effort, to evolve one's own style right from the beginning.
Okay.
Years of learning goes by from the guru, sustained in a very sustained manner, and years of practice. And then comes years of assimilation,
Right.
thought process, chintan manan, as we say, incorporation of newer ideas in one's own baj. And then comes another stage, performing experience, the stage. There are three gurus. One, the person. Second, Riyaz. Riyaz opens up many avenues, shows you, once you are deep into Riyaz, you find many avenues opening up. So Riyaz is also a guru. And third, the stage is a guru, performing. That teaches you a lot, experience. So after all these experiences, slowly, maybe signs of originality and individuality start emerging.
Right.
But at the same time, let us see the other side. Those who don't show any originality or individuality, they are also very important, because they are important to continue the legacy of the art form meaningfully, a particular tradition, a particular legacy. So both sides are important, originality, individuality, and the continuation of a tradition. Both sides are very, very important.
Indeed.
We have to see it in a very holistic manner.
Correct. I was wondering if Rupak has any questions in this context. So, Rupak, yeah. I think we can't hear you.
Is muted, yeah. Mute, Unmute. Yeah.
So
Yes, yeah.
I thought a question to raise. Actually, you are a rare example in the artist fraternity. You are the great tabla player, maestro as well, and an accomplished sitar maestro. Everybody knows. Needless to mention, you are.
Listen, one thing I should tell you, I don't like to acknowledge this kind of. I mean, I'm not nothing great about me,
No,
because
no.
see, I strongly believe, very strongly believe that I'm always a student, and I think any musician should make up his mind and be sure that he is always a student.
No, no, it's not our opinion, but it's opinion. It is considered in the field of the music world, interfraternity. Uh, yes, so it's there. I mean, my question was in this context. You are equally
Yeah.
capable of playing the dual role actually of a tabla player as well as a sitar player. So, what do you expect the most from your peer accompanists as a sitar player? And also, I would love to know what is your insight towards the art of tabla accompaniment?
Mhm. Nice
Share
question.
your
Yeah.
perception.
Just a minute, huh?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. I think you are talking about the role of an accompanist. Are you asking me that?
Yeah,
The role.
I want to know what do you expect the most as a sitar player from your peer accompanist, from a tabla
Okay.
player, suppose,
Yeah.
because you will
See,
be
first,
the right person to perceive the both
thank you,
situation
thank you.
in
First
different
and
angles.
foremost, any tabla player, especially when he's accompanying a melodic artist, he has to really listen to the melodic artist. He has to listen. Oral listening, and mental listening also. And accordingly, appropriately, he should musically react, and the attempt should be to create a dialogue, a conversation. And for this, any tabla player needs to have a sound knowledge of melodic music also. Any tabla player. One has to dwell into melody, learn melodic forms to understand the finer aspects of melodic music. In fact, I'll say there are so many tabla players from the earlier generations who used to be excellent vocalists. And when they sang like gavayas, they sang like vocalists, not just singing or, crooning. The way of singing was also like as if he was a full-fledged vocalist. This we should note for ourselves, that all the past tabla players, Ahmed Jan Tharakwa was, when he sang like a vocalist. Amir Hussain Khan sang like a vocalist. Pandit Shanta Prasad Ji, Ustad Allah Rakha Ji, they sang like vocalists, and many others. A good tabla accompanist or a good tabla accompaniment comes when the person has an affection for melodic music, and therefore he helps in creating that dialogue, that conversation. Because as long as the alap has happened, the main melodic artist, his dialogue is between him and the rag. The rag is also a living entity. So it's a dialogue between the rag and the player. But once the gut starts, the third person also gets into the scene. The rag is already there. The main melodic artist is there. The tabla player comes in. And let's see from the very practical viewpoint that it's a give and take of ideas, throwing ideas at one another. The sitar player builds a certain melodic structure, a huge story. And when he feels that he has conveyed a certain idea or an emotion or a sentiment, he hands over to the tabla player. The tabla player has to have a very subtle understanding and give an extension to that idea, but rhythmically. He has to give an extension. It's not his own solo from his repertoire, pulling out things from his repertoire. See, you will also often notice tabla players who are actually not, you can see from their eyes, they're actually not listening to the main music. They're planning what to play in the next solo, in the next bout, you know. So that's a pure non-involvement. So a tabla player, a good accompanist, is expected to listen to the main music and give something relevant, something which is a continuation of that thought. And for that, either it could be from his repertoire that he already has, or he should be able to create things on spontaneously, extemporizing, and create a further extension to that idea, which should inspire the melodic artist to continue the discussion further, you know. So again, the job of the melodic artist is to pick up the thread where the tabla player left, and you know, the whole idea, the total idea is making music, not just sawal jawab, not I play something and then finally I expect the tabla player to play something and he plays something else, which actually has not much relevance to the music, just that happened. So tabla player has a very responsible role to play. And similarly, when the main artist is principal artist or melodic artist is performing, whether vocal or instrumental, the tabla player should try his best to provide a canvas for the melodic artist to paint, and not you know, he should avoid cluttering of bowls. He should offer a free, smooth, clean canvas. But of course, he should constantly enrich that music which is going on through modulation, maybe modulation of the baya or little variations here and there in the teka, and enriching the melodic music, the vocalist or the instrumental music. And also a very wise usage of the weight and the tonality of the strokes, say kinar or sur. In Calcutta, they say kinar, kani and gab. Okay.
Sur kani.
Sur kani. So this in general, all India language, we call it sur kinar. Sur kinar का तमीज होना चाहिए, पुराने लोग बोलते थे. और किस वजन से बजाना, with what weightage he should play at which point of time. So he has to be constantly a part of that music making. He has to himself feel that music, and in his heart he has to sing that music. Then that wonderful magic can come. So though it is rare, you can't expect it from all the tabla players all the time, you can't. So at least a tabla player should make an attempt to come close to the musical values of the melody.
There must be the repertoire wise, if we think, there are two ways of playing of tabla, that is, one is solo and another is accompaniment. Do you think the repertoire wise treatment should be different in both cases?
See, as I said, once the melodic artist hands over to you for your round of solo, at that time, the accompanist, the tabla player, should first of all, and I might be repeating a little bit, he should understand the musical content of what just finished, and the same sentiment he should carry forward. If necessary, he should extemporize, play spontaneous, and then find his way out to connect with some compositions from his repertoire, you know, to give it a final shape and build on that, and then round off with a tihai. You know, the length of the performance should be very judiciously decided, so as not to dominate the melodic artist performance, both time duration wise as well as volume wise.
Absolutely. So insightful thoughts. And, I want to know further as a ardent student, tabla. We are keen to know about the important conjugate phrases, not the basic syllables, the important conjugate phrases and the figuring techniques. Those were contributed by different gharanas at the time of evolution of the art to the repertoires. It was added of tabla. And also, could you please enlighten us in nutshell about the composition-wise characteristics between different gharana? I know the time is too short, and without
No.
too
This is a
difficult.
wonderful question. This is a wonderful question.
It will be.
I'm sure there are many viewers who
Yeah,
would have similar questions in mind.
absolutely.
Well, first of all, I'll tell you, of all the fields in Hindustani music, tabla is the only field where a composition identifies its origin, its gharana, its baj. Because unlike in melodic music, let's say vocal music, there is a Sakhi area Ali Piya Bina in Yaman. Okay. It can be sung by a Kirana singer, by an Agra singer, by a Gwalior singer, by a Patiala singer. And after all, the composition doesn't show the gayaki. The composition is by itself, the composition. But elaborating the composition will be in their different gharanas. Okay. Agra, Kirana, Gwalior, whatever. You know. But
Style of execution.
yes, here is the difference. In tabla, if you play a qaida or a gat, then it's not that you play Farrukhabad gat in a Delhi style. It can't happen. It can't happen because it because it requires that technique. Specific techniques are there to execute, needed to execute these compositions, and for that, of course, very solid and authentic talim is required. That's the strong base, and which will ensure correct nikas. And here also, I'll tell you, even in solo, the etiquette of sur kinar is very important. That is why even in tabla, the old ustads used to say, sur kinar ki tamiz honi chahiye. They used to say, very, very important. Where to play in kinar and which bowl to play in sur is very, very important. Because otherwise, what's happening? I've seen a lot of younger tabla players these days. It happens out of ignorance. I don't blame them, but they play beautifully. But what happens is, if you are going to use a kinar in place of a sur, or a sur in place of kinar, then and at the end, let's say the performance is beautiful, the composition is beautiful, but it's like a very well written essay with plenty of spelling mistakes, and also messing up uppercase and lowercase.
So pertinent point.
I'll tell you, I'm seeing nowadays, for example, this is a purab kaida. है ना? Now,
Yeah,
I'm hearing many young tabla players playing in kinar. It is very astonishing. It is very shocking, actually.
And also,
This is to be played in sur.
Tagdedenag is being played
Yeah.
in Kina.
But see, Lucknow tukdas. These tukdas, they are to be played in sur, not in kinar, because then its musical value automatically evaporates.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have an impactful effect. So it's very important that gharana characteristics they should be maintained. So that's why maybe in other music you say that the whole concept of gharana is obsolete now. That's in melodic music, that's different. But in tabla, gharana is a very contemporary concept, a very contemporary idea. And I mean, this is something unique where,
inseparable part of tabla playing, the techniques.
Yes. So the whole idea is, let me tell you, for example, Dhage. Dhage, for example. Dhati dhage na, dhati dhage na, dhatirikit dhati dhage tina ke na. There are two dhages in this kaida. Popular kaida. Everybody plays, everybody knows. Dhati dhage na, dhatirikit dhati dhage tina ke na, dhati dhage na, dhatirikit dhati dhage tina. Now, that dhage, the one dhage is to be played this way, the other dhage is this way.
1, 2, and 2.
So, yeah, you index and middle, or middle and index. Of course, remember all tabla, young tabla players, I must tell you that the second finger, the index finger, comes into play only if there is a consecutive stroke of baya. Consecutive. Lag lag ke agar aata hai, Bangla jeta bole lege lege jo diya kar kore akashe. So then comes the question of using the index finger in baya. And you have to see what's coming before and what's coming after. Also the weightage. For example, dhati dhagena. It is supposed to be dhagena. Dhati rikite. Dhati dhagetina kena. So the first dhage will automatically be dhage.
Yeah.
And the second dhage will be dhage. The second dhage will be dhage. So there is a difference in weightage and expression. And you know, on several platforms, I have been talking about tabla, just like human language. When you utter, you know, syllables, consonants, whatever, vowels, it is the right hand, the tabla hand, which is producing the utterances. The baya is the expression. When we do pitch variation, you say, hello, how are you? You know, Rupak, nice to meet you. See, all this da 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 da. These are expressions to speech. Otherwise, speech would be like a robot. So, baya is what gives that expression and therefore the life to the tabla. Till then, tabla, all the sounds that are coming on the tabla, they are beautiful sounds, but there is no life in it. The life comes only when baya comes into play. Pranta ito jaya utate. The pran comes into the tabla.
And which are the prominent phrases that that was introduced by Lucknow Gharana, suppose? Dhagetete or Kredhetete.
In Sur, Dhagetete. But Dhagetete is there in Delhi also. But it is produced by Kinar and by two finger tete. Dhage tete. But in Sur, in Lucknow, it will be Dha in Sur and tete will be like that, you know, tete. So the execution is different. Same Dhage tete. Lucknow plays in a different way, Delhi plays in a different way. So that again depends on the composition and what's coming before and after.
Okay. Does Delhi style support tete in reverse way? Does in any kaida, any possible phrases? Does Delhi support ulta tete?
No. Traditional Delhi has always had te. Okay, and traditional Delhi, yeah. The first tete that came in the ulta way, that is te. Let me see in the camera. Te and te came from the teen tal teka, you know, drut teka nadindina, you know, nate teta. This has come a big contribution from Banaras.
Yeah.
So this has made drut teen tal very attractive and very unique. This is Banaras's contribution, the ulta tete. But traditional Delhi has split tete. Yeah.
And fixed composition wise, which are the main characteristics of different gharana? I mean, we identify gharana with their compositions. In some gharana, gods are popular. In some gharanas, that is my.
I'll tell you, this is a huge subject. Maybe we should choose another occasion for it. But I'll try to tell you in a very concise manner is that Delhi and Ajrada are famous for Delhi is famous for peshkars and kaidas. Ajrada is famous for ajrada kaidas. Okay, and Purab, which means Farrukhabad, Lucknow, Banaras.
Banaras.
Farrukhabad speciality is a huge body of Gath compositions. Of course, Farrukhabad also has its own peshkar, it has its own qaida, and tukras. But Gath is one of the main identities of Farrukhabad. And Lucknow is very famous for tukras and parans. Banaras is very famous for parans, baat, many and many other kaidas and relas also. Relas is common to almost all the gharanas. So these are the compositions which are already classified, and different gharanas have their own compositions under these classifications. So, otherwise, I don't want this discussion to become too technical, because it can be, there's a fear of it becoming a dry discussion. So, on a tabla platform, we'll talk about it on a tabla platform.
It is undoubtedly beneficial for the tabla players, tabla learners as well, all over the.
Of course.
Should I continue with another question? Or
you're welcome. If that is all right with Anirban, that's
no,
fine.
I mean, questions are always welcome. I mean, whatever the source might be. I mean, whether it's me or Rupak, most welcome. But maybe, I mean, Rupak, you please go ahead with your question, and then I will pitch in with some tuppence of mine.
Sure. After this, my last question.
Okay. Let me. Since we talked about that, one thing comes to my mind just now. I told you about dhage. Fine. Recitation is very important. Recitation also. I'm observing many tabla players saying dhada tete dhada tunna. Tunna was, see, basically this composition is Delhi. Dhatete dhatete dhada tete dhage tunna kena. Delhi never has tunna. It is tina. Well, and if you are saying tuna, then why don't you say dhuna at the other end? Dada tete, dada tuna, dada tete, dada dhuna. Say that. वो तो होता नहीं है. So it is very important to know what is the Delhi language, what is the Ajrada language, what is the Farrukhabad language, what is the Lucknow language, Banaras language. Every gharana has its language. And if you are reciting a composition of a certain gharana, you have to use that language. So dhada tete dhada tinna, dhatete dhatete dhada tete dhage tinna kena, dhati dhagena dhatere dhati dhage tinna kena. These are all Delhi compositions. So tunna just doesn't come there. It's just like, you speak English and suddenly you bring in a Hindi or a Bengali or Tamil word,
Which we are habituated with these days.
This tuna thing has to go away, because it's really bothering me at least, and many traditionally strongly based tabla players.
Absolutely.
And
we heard our Boro Guruji, Pandit Gyan Prakash Ghoshji, used to say that if tabla could be presented with absolute fineness and perfection, it becomes a literature. He used to say the quote unquote tabla shahitya. He used to say.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely. Not only that, I will add something more to this. Tabla is a huge, just like any language. You have start with alphabets. Children learn with alphabets, A, B, C, D. Then they learn words. Then they learn sentences. Then they learn little poems. And then as they grow, they learn literature and poetry. It's sahitya. The tabla is a huge sahitya world, first and foremost. Now, another important, my own observation, tabla is not just a percussion instrument. Let us all begin to understand and realize and acknowledge that tabla is the only percussion instrument which goes beyond percussion into music making. There is a full musical experience that one can derive from a beautiful tabla recital, solo or accompaniment. Music making. So, see, I'll tell you, often people can ask me, what about standardization? Standardization happens when an instrument remains percussion. But standardization doesn't come when it goes beyond percussion into music. The tabla is able to create just one note and a pair of drums. But what a rich literature, what a rich idea. So many human imaginations are translated into the tabla language and expressed. And sentiments and even emotions are there in tabla.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So,
in this connection,
yes. So it will be very unfair if we bring down tabla from the musical instrument to percussion instrument. It is not percussion. That is why there are compositions, for example, everything doesn't need to be played fast. Speed is not applicable for every composition. The composition itself tells you, this is how you treat me. Certain compositions have to be played fast, relas, tukras, they have to be played fast. But there are some certain compositions which loses beauty if it is played beyond a certain speed. Speed is not everything. Number one, speed is the easiest to achieve. This for the students of music. Any instrument, vocal music, tabla, instrument, sitar, sarod, speed is the easiest thing to achieve. There are secrets how to achieve speed. There's a method of practicing, but that is not everything. Speed is a very important element in tabla, but to be judiciously used. And the language, the poetry shouldn't be lost. The music shouldn't be lost. And so speed, I mean, let's put it this way. Rupak, are you there? Can you hear me? Rupak, can you hear me? Am I audible to?
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Just like a horse looks beautiful when it gallops. A galloping horse is far more attractive than a walking horse. A running elephant doesn't look good. An elephant walking majestically is far more impressive. So also there are compositions which need to be treated that way. Every composition
so
has
beautifully.
Every composition has a personality, and one must understand the personality. उसका जिसको हिंदी में कहते हैं उसका चाल, उसका मिजाज समझना बहुत जरूरी है. मिजाज और चाल.
In this connection, I was just about to ask this question actually.
Sure.
In this context, if we compare the way of tabla playing by the then masters to that of the contemporary approach in our generation, I'm including my generation only. I'm excluding, the generation before. Of course, it seems though it may sound a bit subjective, the lyrical beauty and the sense of poetry are getting somehow dominated by the mathematical complexity and speed. What is your perception?
Yeah.
You have already covered many things upon
this
context.
Very nice question. As I said some time back, tabla has a very highly developed language, a very unique language, a rich usage of poetry, prose, storytelling, dramatic, etc. And it wasn't as if mathematics wasn't present in tabla. Mathematics was there since the past also, but it was always coated with aesthetics. So beautifully coated that one couldn't see the mathematics. But today, mathematical approach has developed further, probably influenced by Carnatic system. And ultimately, time will tell of its impact on the art per se. Time will tell. Because, see, there are so many angles to cover, and just one lifetime is not enough. One needs to devote one full lifetime just in one particular dimension. So if somebody is thinking a lot on mathematics in tabla, fine. even before he comes to any conclusion, the lifetime is over. This art is so big. It takes so much time to develop. And mathematics is definitely important, is one of the important elements. But there has to be, we have to remember that the tabla has its strength in the poetry, in the aesthetics. That's where the strength of tabla lies. And let us remember that tabla is an art. If we dominate it with too much of mathematics, the art will turn into craft. And we have to take care that the art doesn't become craft. It's what is the purpose of tabla? It's the purpose of music. And music is what? Something that gives joy to your soul and doesn't bother you and doesn't perplex you or confuse you and you know, दिमाग को परेशान करने का काम नहीं है. गाना बजाना जो है वो सुकून चैन देने वाली शांति वाली चीज है. तो उसमें अगर ज्यादा मैथमेटिक्स करेंगे तो दिमाग को परेशानी होता है. और one should know where to put a full stop or a comma.
Yeah.
So we just had absolutely wonderful and in-depth discussions on some of the areas in tabla playing, and I'm sure, I mean, we saw so many questions coming, and I'm sure, I mean, the listeners are absolutely fascinated. So coming back to a more, I would say, a generalized topic.
Yeah.
I mean, I believe you would agree, Kaku, that teaching Indian classical music is something very, very involved. Teaching of Indian classical music. So, my question to you is that if you perceive a methodology for teaching Indian classical music, what should be the principal considerations?
Let's start this way. Basically, there are no shortcuts to the traditional method of sustained talim, whether past or present. In-depth riyaz, assimilation, these all take time. There's no shortcut to it. But I also strongly believe in a couple of things that need to go side by side. We need to take advantage of today's modern gadgets also.
Indeed.
And make optimum use. You know, that would be ideal. Times have changed.
Absolutely.
Now the mobile is there, WhatsApp is there. If you have any question, you can just WhatsApp your guru and ask him the question, and he gives you the answer, and you have the video facilities. It wasn't there a couple of decades back. I'll give you an interesting story with this. My father, in his bachelor days, was practicing. He used to practice, say, anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day. Okay, and his practice times would often be from evening till early morning. Now it so happened that once he was practicing something till late evening, and something bothered him, and he felt maybe things he was not doing it the right way. And that was when he was under his first guru, Gyan Prakash Ghoshji. Gyan Prakash Ghoshji happened to be in Bombay, staying at the residence of Nitin Bose, and Pahadi Sanyal also used to come there, and they used to often play billiards together. And my father used to stay in a small tenement in Malad, which is probably about 15-20 kilometers from there. But there was heavy rains, and it was night, around 9 or 10 o'clock. He went by train to Bandra station, which was the nearest station, after which there is about a 4-kilometer walk. He waded through the water, heavy rains, floods, and he knocked on the door. Gyan Babu happened to open the door, and he said, "What? Nikhil, now at this time? And in this condition, completely drenched, wet. Come inside, you know." And what's the matter? So my father said, no, Gurudev, what happened is I was practicing this so-and-so thing that you had taught me, but I was afraid that maybe there's something not right with it. So I don't want tonight's practice to go waste.
Absolutely.
So I want
Yes.
you to correct me. I'll go back and work on it tonight.
Right.
So Gyan Babu said, no, you're in this heavy rain, you are not going anywhere. Come inside, take a shower and change of clothes and so on. And he corrected that. And while he and Pahari Sanil were playing billiards, my father was sitting at the corner and working out on that composition. See, those days, there was no video, no WhatsApp, no mobile, nothing. And the trouble he took to come in those heavy rains, from such a big distance. Today we have so many advantages. So I think one should very carefully and very meaningfully use these modern gadgets to one's advantage. And I do encourage recording also during talim.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because sometimes gurus discourage that. They say, no recording during talim. No. Then the progress will be too slow.
My father actually often insisted that the talim be recorded.
Yes, because then the progress will be much faster.
Right, indeed.
And especially since time is of essence in these days, in these times,
Correct.
the guru, both for guru and shishya also. So, I devised my own methodology for to make the learning process more effective.
Correct.
And all that way, all great gurus have the quality. They have the quality to transmit the nuances and the finer details and the depth of any subject.
Correct.
With a clarity of thought and effective enough for students of different aptitudes.
Correct. So, Kaku, as we said that.
One more thing, if I can add. I strongly believe not to write when you are learning a lesson in music. It is very important that you learn to play it, memorize it, assimilate it in the presence of the guru, and then later write for future reference. If someday, after 25 years, if you have forgotten it, you can refer to that notation or that writing, or for any finer details. But there are sometimes teachers who tell you to write first and then they start teaching you. That's very detrimental to music learning. Memorizing, retention power, sharpening the retention power is very, very important in music. You have to play. For example, I know how to write notations, but all my life, the thousands and thousands of compositions I learned in tabla, vocal music, sitar, I never wrote a single composition in my life. It's all here in the memory. You have to practice, you have to assimilate it. So it becomes second nature to you, like natural, like breathing. I've seen your father, Buddhadev. At the drop of a hat, he'll reel out a composition without even taking half a minute to think on it. It just comes. That is the level of assimilation one needs to have.
Apart from teaching, if you consider the approach of learning, the attitude towards learning, how would you say that it has evolved or changed over the past 4 or 5 decades? The attitude towards learning. Students of
yes. First of all, if the student is lucky enough to get a very good guru, a sense of surrender has to be an important part in the relation.
Exactly.
Sense of surrender has to come, because then only, because the guru's lifelong experience is what he's giving you in a nutshell, in a lesson. One betak and whatever you are getting is actually his lifetime's experience. So the student should realize that what he's getting in those 20 minutes, it has taken 20 years for that guru to assimilate that and acquire that. So the first element in attitude is surrender and accept the guru's advice and instructions. Of course, in the Western concept, there is always room for argument,
Indeed. Questions and arguments.
questions, which is good. Which is good because in these modern times, it's good to question. But then you question only when you are very well equipped already.
Exactly.
Don't question when you are ignorant.
Exactly. Exactly.
Only when you are stocked and heavily equipped, well armed,
Right.
with lot of knowledge and wisdom, then you can question. Don't question otherwise, because the Guru knows what is good for you and he's giving you with all the faith, and you have to take it with all the faith.
So, as you said that you have largely kind of picked up, imbibed and assimilated compositions rather than, writing it down. So I would be very curious to know about some of the memorable bandishes which you, I don't know, if not the sitar, if you can sing out some of your favorite bandishes that you learned from your gurus. And
I hope there is no time constraint right now in our show.
don't worry, Kaku. And the other thing is that I would be equally, if not more, interested to hear a few compositions of your own.
Okay. Okay. Let's, I'm starting the Tanpura on my iPhone. Can you hear it?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Well, let me start with your father,
Okay.
Pandit Buddhadev Dasgupta, my Buddhada. What I learned from him, so many different compositions, Gat compositions, but I like to just bandishes that I really relished that he taught me. For example, Muhammad Amir Khan Sahab's Jinjoti,
Uh-huh.
Firoz Khani Gat.
Cheers.
Dir dir da 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 dir da dir da 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 dir dir da 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 dir da dir da 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 dir dir da 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 dir da 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 dir da 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 dir da 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 dir dir da da dir da dir da da da. Firoz Khani Gat,
Absolutely.
which you play so beautifully.
Thank you. And actually,
This
in the
was-
same breath, Kaku, in the same breath, Kaku, if you can give just a kind of a thumbnail explanation of these Firoz Khani, Riza Khani, and Masjid Khani guts for the listeners,
Oh, sure.
please. So,
Yeah. Well, the first form of gat that came about in sitar
right.
is Masjid Khani.
Correct.
And Masjid Khan was the grandson of the person who invented the sitar, Amir Khan Khosrow.
Correct.
Masjid Khan was his grandson. Now, what Masjid Khan did was since Khayal started getting popular, and it was Amir Khan Khosrow's brother-in-law, Sadarang Niyamat Khan, who was credited for a whole lot of Khayal composition. Khayal started picking up, and Khayal is what influenced and impressed Masjid Khan. So he thought of a formula
Right.
wherein he could express the music of Khayal. And so he created this composition in 16 beats, starting from the 12th beat, the right hand strokes going dee da dee da 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 dee da dee da 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 dee da dee da. Then there are varieties, of course.
Exactly.
Dee da dee da 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 da, or dee da dee da 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 dee da 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 dee da 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 da.
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah, there are variations. So, in fact, the idea of Masjid Khanigat, Masjid Khan was a more refined version of his grandfather's composition known as Amir Khanigat. I'll give you one Amir Khanigat. in Yaman. Dida da 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 da. Dida da da da. Manja. Dida da da. Da dida da dida da. Dida da. Dida da antara da. Dida da da dida da dida da dida da dida da. This is the original Gat. Not even Masjid Khani, but Amir Khani, the grandfather of Masjid Khan. And then Masjid Khan Sahab established this formula, which is so contemporary even today. We are talking about Masjid Khan.
Typically, any Tintal Vilambik Gat you talk about like kind of fits into this pretty much.
And imagine Masjid Khan 350 years back. What kind of a futuristic mind he had that it is relevant and contemporary even today. Well, the name Masjid Khani came not in his lifetime, about 2 generations later, when Raza Khan of Lucknow started making Drut compositions from the idea of Tarana. Masjid Khan did it from Khayal. Raza Khan did it from Tarana.
Correct.
So that's when the name Masjid Khani got labeled to Masjid Khan's compositions about 100 years after him. And now comes the question of Firoz Khani Gat. Firoz Khani Gats are not expected to be executed in a little slower speed than Drut.
Correct.
And there are various other features. Let me tell you, Masjid Khani and Raza Khani Gats must have 3 parts: Sthai, Manja, Antara.
Indeed.
But Firoz Khani Gat doesn't need all those stages, just one stage, because it covers the requirements of Manja and Antara also in this Sthai. And therefore, it runs into more than 2 or 3 avartans, more than 3 rounds. The one which I just sang some back, I learned from your father.
It is actually, I think 2 or 3 different sums. If you sing the whole Gat, it hits the sum number of times.
Yes. And Firoz Khani Gat affords or gives scope to a lot of right-hand work, whether Sarod or whether sitar. A lot of mizrab possibilities can be plucking patterns can be employed, and because of the speed not being too fast, kind of a little slower than fast, the Firoz Khani Gats give you plenty of opportunities to explore your plucking patterns. So these are basically the 3 differences. Where were we? We were on bandishes.
And
the bandishes, my favorite bandishes. For example, what I learned again from Buddhadev was Gaur Malhar. Da 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 da. Did da 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 did da 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 did da 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 did da 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 did da 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 did da 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 did da 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 did da da did da da did did da 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 did da 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 did da da da. What Muhammad Amir Khan's composition? What a complete feeling! You get the entire rag has been covered in it.
A true bandish, they would call it.
Then in Zila, da 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 What grand compositions. Bahar, the Domui Gat,
Indeed, indeed.
Again,
Wonderful.
Mohammed Amir Khan's composition.
Kaku, I mean, now, I mean, if you could please share with us some of your own compositions.
I will, but for that, it will be fair on my part to also show you my father's sitar and
Indeed,
vocal composition.
absolutely, absolutely.
Let's say my father. Am I too loud? Because
No, no,
I have this little mic.
no, not at all.
Okay. Let's say in Dech, my father's composition. Da 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 da
Come on.
This is my father's composition.
Actually, this reminds me, Kaku, Nikhil Dadu had set a tune to Vande Mataram
Oh yeah,
based on Tilak Kamod, if I'm right.
Miyaki Mallar.
Miyagi, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'll come to that. I'll show you another gat by my uncle Pannalal Ghosh in Khamaj.
Indeed.
Pannalal Ghosh's composition, sitar composition.
Uh-huh.
Then let's say a vocal composition of my father. So we were on Desh. Let's कैसे कहूँ कौन सुने कैसे कहूँ कौन सुने जिया जाको जान कछु भून मान जिया जाको जान कछु भून मान जीती मरू 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 कैसे कहूँ. Then of course his live compositions in Kolkata, they are so popular. Madhyam Sama के भूला ले बारे बारे के भूला ले बारे बारे. There's a Hindi version also to it. क्यों गुलाल रंग डालो क्यों गुलाल रंग डालो साड़ी साड़ी मोरी ना बिगाड़ो साड़ी साड़ी मोरी दादिन्ना दादिन्ना ना बिगाड़ो क्यों गुलाल रंग डालो. These are his compositions.
The Bengali version was sung by Krishna Dasgupta. It was
Yes.
very popular, and I mean, happens to be one of my favorite songs.
And even nowadays, Haimanti Di sings that beautiful.
Beautiful.
Haimanti Shukla ji.
Yeah, yeah.
And my compositions, I feel I wish we had discussed some other time. But
Please, Kaka.
which? Sitar, tabla or vocal?
All, everything. Everything.
Pancham. Alaya Bilawal. And this composition, I got it approved by your father, Buddhadev, and he deeply appreciated this composition. Sa ga re ga pa ni da ni sa da ni da pa de re no. Dir dir da 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 dir dir da 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 da. Da 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 dir 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 da 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 dir dir da 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 da. Da 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 dir 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 da 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 dir dir da 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 da. Desh. Da 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 da. Let me tell you, especially in antaras of my compositions, I am heavily influenced by Buddhada style in the antaras. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Da da dir dir da 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 dir dir da 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 dir da 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 dir dir da 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 dir dir da 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 dir da 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 dir dir da 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 dir dir da 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 dir dir da 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 dir da 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 dir dir da 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 dir dir da 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 dir da 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 dir da 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 dir da da na din din na da din din na da din din na. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Buddhada is a very big inspiration source for me for all these guts. Another gut in God Sarang I made when I was in my teens. The no pa pa dire 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 da da dire dire da 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 ma ba ni da ni da ni da ma ga ni da ni da dire 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 da da dire dire da 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 pa ma ga ni da ni da ni da ma ga ni da ni da da dire dire da da dire dire da 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 God Sarang. There are many anyway. Vocal or tabla? Vocal. And then tabla.
Then tabla, please.
Vocal. Many bandishes I have tried my way out. Miyan ki Mallar. Sa ma re pa ni ma pa da खेले नंद दुलाल बन में खेले नंद दुलाल बन में संग संग नाचत मोर संग संग नाचत मोर रिम झिम बूंद बरसे खेले नंद दुलाल बन में दिन दिन संग संग नाचत मोर दिन दिन हठात भूले जाइए खेले नंद दुलाल बन में संग संग नाचत मोर रिम झिम बूंद बरसे खेले नंद दुलाल बन झूम झूम नाचत मन मोहन झूम झूम नाचत मन मोहन सखियन देख निहारे सखियन देख निहारे रिम झिम नैन बरसे खेले नंद दुलाल बन tabla.
আমি একটা জিনিস যোগ করতে চাই
Sure.
এই প্রসঙ্গে গেন দুছাল গত আমার এই মুহূর্তে মনে পড়ছে নন্দদুলালের ডেসক্রিপশন শুনে এত সুন্দর
Traditional composition আছে.
yeah you just
there is a traditional composition gain duchal gat. तान पूरा बंद कर दी.
it sounds
gain
very
duchal
nice.
gat in tabla the guts are of many varieties. My father used to say 52 varieties of guts are there. However, one of them is gain duchal gat. And gain duchal means gain means ball, uchal means bouncing. So it's a story about playing, two children playing with ball, for example. Da din din da da. Listen to the gut, and then I'll describe the playing of the children. Gat na nagite tikata gaddi gana dake tete gena kata gaddi kata dagana datra kadena gaddi gena ta da ti na it is a gain duchal gat, this particular one, and is also a do mui gat. The same ball that is right in the beginning comes at the right at the end also.
Yeah.
Now where is the gain duchal? Imagine the one child throwing a ball.
Mind blowing. Oh, excellent. And we are keen to hear a few of your compositions, if you can, please.
I know which one. I have made around 200 compositions, I think, till now.
Yeah, so you have so many kaidas and so many.
Sure, kaida. Let's do some kaida. For example, kaida in the Delhi. Then a kaida in the Farrukabadan. Many kaidas. Gat tukra. Gat.
As you wish. Anything.
Dan that dan da again attack then gadan can naga then dan then attack then gada can naga then Dan attack then then tukras
I think it may be a Jora kind of thing of some old compositions. Ustad Amir Hussain Khan sahab ওনার কিছু কম্পোজিশনের একটা জোড়া মনে হলো শুনে, মানে এত সুন্দর। এটা কি আপনি সেভাবে কনসেপ্ট করেছিলেন?
হতে পারে, আমার জানা নেই এটা।
আপনার কাছে শুনেছি, আপনার অবশ্যই জানা আছে, মনে পড়ছে না।
এটা আমি অনিন্দ ভাইকে দিয়েছি এটা।
I would love to learn this. Oh.
So এইসব চালু থাকে, they, you know, compositions you don't plan and make, it just comes. It just comes.
So beautiful. I'm just I'm over to the next question. If Anirban da.
Sure. So taking a slightly different direction.
Yeah.
You have been pretty much. You were born and you grew up with the institution Sangeet Mahabharati, which was established by Nikhil Dadu. And one of the most, I would say, significant and unique projects undertaken in Sangeet Mahabharati was the Encyclopedia of Indian Classical Music. So can you tell us something about this project and what milestones were achieved in course of working on this project?
Sure. See, the encyclopedia, my father felt the need of a comprehensive reference book for any seeker or for future research scholars. And this was in the 50s, he felt the need. And he felt since, in Western classical music, we have the Grove's Dictionary, we have the encyclopedia for Western music. Why not for Indian music? So that's how it started, because what happened is, not only students, teachers also, or even musicians themselves, when they want some clarification on a certain point, they have to go and meet so many different other scholars or musicians. And then there are differences of opinion. Say one particular thing might be explained in different ways by different people.
Absolutely.
That's another possibility. Then no dependable book. You go from library to library and you don't get anything substantial or a clear explanation. So he felt, let charity begin at home, and he started writing and gradually involved great scholars. So the nearest person in Bombay was at that time Dr. S.N. Ratanjankar, the disciple of Bhattacharjee, who himself was a very good musician and a scholar also. And so he got him into the project and said, let us start. I need your blessings and I need your support. And I'll start writing. I'll send articles one after the other to you. And you can examine it, approve it, disapprove it, slash it, criticize it. That's how it started. And then gradually, as a few years passed, many great scholars got involved in the project. My father approached one after the other, several scholars. And at one particular point of time, there were almost 300 scholars who were contributing for the encyclopedia. Today, there's not one living. All of them are gone. And it was in the nick of time that all this information was brought, collected, compiled, and then scrutinized. See, one particular, let's say one scholar, Mr. X, has written something on a subject, and there is another scholar who differs strongly on the same subject. So anonymously, an article or an entry would be sent to that other scholar to give his comments. And if they are valid comments, let's say we finally had the editorial board. Editorial board would take a decision. But if there were two valid but very differing views, then both were given. The conclusion is to be drawn by the reader. So this way, slowly, a huge area of information was documented. And my father started it initially with a few assistants, and very soon, and a very important assistant joined him, Dr. S.D. Pillai, who was an expert in anthropology. And he was given charge of the editorial, the editing of the material. By the way, our editorial board had people like Dr. Ratan Jankar, Gurudev Gyan Prakash Ghosh, Thakur Jaidev Singh, Pandit Dinkar Kaikini, Pandit K.G. Ginde, Premlata Sharma ji, and many other editorial board had very, very respectable figures. And Dr. Pillai, who was assisting my father, put in tremendous amount of work over the years. He has aged now, but he's still continuing. We are working on the second edition and a smaller, concise version on the handbook. But essentially, the encyclopedia covers what kind of topics, I'll tell you. Besides ragas and talas, there is technical terms, which is the biggest section. Different things, what are they called and why are they called like that? Biographies, bibliography, biographies of musicians, musicologists, entrepreneurs, organizers, institution makers, and so on. And then other history, for example, history, gharanas, instruments, and other forms of music, not only classical, folk, tribal music, religious music, spiritual music, military music, popular music, Bollywood music, naval music, music of the neighboring countries where there has been interaction. So we have covered from Tibet to Sri Lanka and Iran to Indonesia. So a vast area has been covered. And I should say it's really a great achievement that in one lifetime this was done, because normally an encyclopedia like in Britannica took 3 generations in an advanced country like England. But in India, where people are not yet so enlightened about or understand the urgency or importance of such an academic work, to finish it in 50 years was a massive achievement. It started formally, it was given a formal shape in 1961, and in 2011, it got published by the Oxford University Press. This is another great feather in our cap, because my father always dreamt of an organization like Oxford, OUP, Oxford University Press, to publish it. But my father passed away much before that happened. And about 3 years after my father's demise, the Oxford University people themselves came forward and they checked all our research papers. And for 3 days, they literally grilled us about our method of research. They were very impressed. They said it was a foolproof method of research. And they took interest. They said, we are interested to publish that. So in 2011, it was released in 87 countries around the world. So the encyclopedia has been a very important reference source for future scholars, for musicians, for teachers, for students, for anyone who seeks information. Because it's a 3-volume book. Yeah, each page probably, each book probably runs into 500-600 pages. So it's a 3-volume alphabetically thing. So, and I was also a natural part of the encyclopedia research, assisting my father, and among the many scholars and great Pandits who were associated with it. So today we are still working on it. Dr. Pillai should get all the credit for the work he has done, especially after my father's demise. He really piloted the whole project, because otherwise probably it would have fallen off the rails.
Absolutely. One of its kind. And I would actually move over to a different topic.
Before that, should I interrupt with my question? Yeah, I cannot resist asking Kaku about some experience, or his experience, or about the tradition of Loggi playing. I'm not going to embarrass him anymore, praising his expertise.
No problem.
On the subject. But I will ask.
I'll tell you.
What was the tradition, and which factors
No,
should
I'll
be
tell
kept
you.
in mind.
Yeah,
Keep in
I'll
mind
tell
at the
you.
time of Tumri accompaniment, especially.
I'll tell you, Laggi, there has never been a tradition as such. There is no lineage for Laggi, like in classical tabla or vocal or sitar or sarod. Laggi never had a tradition that way. But the tradition pertains to Thumri singing. In Thumri renditions in the past, I'm not talking of these concert days, auditorium concerts, I'm talking of the past. The mostly they were female singers. Perhaps you know that the first male Thumri singer was Ustad Sadiq Ali Khan Sahab, who brought it out from the clutches of the personal harem of the Nawabs and so on. So,
Of Lucknow.
Thumri
Of Lucknow.
of
Lucknow.
Lucknow,
Right.
mainly, yes. Sadiq Ali Khan Sahab lived in Lucknow.
Was from Lucknow.
And Sadiq Ali Khan Sahab is approximately, let's say, lived in the early 19th century. Early 19th century. He probably died around the 1875 or something like that.
Okay.
Uh, well, talking about Thumri singing, the songstress, the woman singer, would sing the Thumri sitting down, accompanied by tabla and sarangi, and elaborating Thumri, she would do adas. Ada yani expression, just like in Kathak dance, expression through eyes, through face, through hands, through gestures, storytelling through the song. And when the antara was over, she would get up and stand and do some footwork, Kathak, like tatkar, what is done in Kathak, tatkar. She would stand up and do tatkar, and the instrumentalists would all get up and stand up and hold the instruments tied to their waist. You know, so sarangi was tied to the shoulder and to the on the left arm, and tablas were tied in a cloth going around through from the waist. You know. So the tabla player used to stand up and play the tablas while she would dance. And so since the antara got over, that was automatically a signal for the tatkar to start and for laggis to start. And the laggi players, it is very, very important that the laggi player should feel the song in his heart while the song is going on, because then that will show him the way ahead, to play the laggi. It's like to make a painting on a canvas, splashing colors of rhythm.
Absolutely.
And so that is how laggis used to be played at the end of a thumri on the completion of an antara. And I have been very fortunate to listen to laggis since my childhood. My father used to play excellent laggis, and the way he used to start, जिसको कहते हैं उठान, जमीन बना के फिर उठान लेना और फिर लग्गी पे जाना. So this my father was since he was so, in our family, music and versatility was so much inherent that this came naturally to my father. And then, of course, when Ustad Ahmed Jan Therapal Khan Sahab started staying at our place, I heard him play laggis and teaching my father and referring to other great laggi players that whom he had heard and he was inspired by. One of them was Abul Mia of Kanpur. So Therapal Khan Sahab used to play his own laggis and Abul Mia's laggis. So I learned a few listening to him. And then I also listened to the laggis of another wonderful tabla player in Bombay, Abdul Karim. He was a little older to my father. Abdul Karim, he used to play. You will listen to his fantastic tabla and dholak in films like Pakiza, because his elder brother Ghulam Muhammad was the music director, assisting Naushad Ali. And the tabla dholak in all the old time songs in Umrao Jan and Pakiza and all, they are all by Abdul Karim. He was a great laggi player. Yeah, and he was, though older to my father, but with me he was like a friend. he would come every second or third day to my home and just spend hours with me talking about tabla. And, he would ask me to recite various compositions. He would name the composer and I would reel out the compositions. And then sometimes I would just coax him and say, Chacha, thoda sa laggi sunaiye na. And he would always normally postpone. He would say, nahi beta, aaj nahi, aur kabhi bajayenge. Aise karte karte karte. Then sometimes he played. Oh, though he was very old, in his 70s at that time, and probably even 80s. But you could make out what he was in his younger days. And then Nizamuddin Khan Sahab, a much younger colleague of my father, he was also a source of inspiration. But maybe it won't be wrong on my part to say that most of the laggis that you hear today, my laggis, with the exception of 3 or 4, Rupak Khan Sahab, Abul Miaz, Nizamuddin Khan Sahab, most of the laggis are my own, because I got an idea how laggis go about. The khulna and band hona of the baya is very important in a laggi pattern. And the baya opening and closing will vary. In a thumri, it will be different. In a bhajan, it will be different.
Yeah.
बाएं का जो खुलना और बंद होना, वो भजन के लिए अलग है, ठुमरी के लिए अलग है, गजल के लिए अलग है. तो anyway, मुझे रास्ते मिले. I found a lot of avenues, and I composed many and laggis. And today I feel really proud that my laggis have become so popular that almost all tabla players in India today are playing my laggis. So God bless them. They are doing a good. But remember one thing: there is a very subtle difference between laggi and ladi. If you don't know what a laggi is, you might end up playing ladis. So ladi is different from laggi. Often we hear many tabla players playing ladis, but since the listeners are ignorant, they don't know what's the difference.
Yeah.
But as a tabla player, I know that that's not a laggi; it's a ladi that's going on. So ladi is different.
Could you cite an example?
Yeah, ladi could be. This is a ladi, not a laggi. Or this is a ladi. Then parts of kaida. These are nothing. This is from classical. You are borrowing from classical tabla and making half the size and calling it a lagi. It's not a lagi. It's a ladi.
Okay.
These are ladis.
Sound close to rela. Close.
Yes. Yeah.
Very closely spaced bowls are there.
Yeah. Or even dhag. For example, dhag. This is nothing. This is borrowing from classical tabla and being under the impression that this is lagi. It is not a lagi. These are all ladis and kaida, parts of kaida. Laggi is a different story altogether.
Okay. And I want to ask a very short question, not very short, but there is
as a tabla player, when you are accompanying thumri singers, not only should you have that song in your heart going on, but your spontaneous musical impulse should set you free, and you should start flying.
Whatever is coming in at the time.
Yeah.
Guided by the melodic approach of the MC song.
So
there
have
is
I answered your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a very interesting concept of which is popularly known as dangal. We have heard a lot of about this incidents, interesting incidents from you and the elder musicians. Would you share few of the incidents?
Sure.
It is simultaneously very, very enlightening and inspiring.
Yeah. Nice
and
question.
I have heard a lot of interesting anecdotes and stories from you, directly. I was so privileged, and I just request to share a few of them uh, with our audience.
Absolutely, absolutely. My pleasure. Let me tell you, dangals used to be weekly meetings of musicians on a Friday generally. Jumme ka dangal. Jumma means Friday. So weekly meetings, they were like, it was like a congregation. It was like musical socializing, routine. It was the routine for musical socializing. And musicians used to gather, young and old. And it was very important to observe a certain code of conduct there. Ethics of performance. The whole ethics of performance, one used to learn from such occasions. Musical etiquette. The whole idea was that it would start, at some kotha of some tawaif one Friday, maybe in a rotation it would go next Friday to another venue, and so on. And around 4 o'clock, all the musicians would gather in the afternoon. The younger artists would play first, and then somebody a little more senior, then somebody a little more senior, and finally the senior most would perform. So what used to happen, that those evenings were sponsored by the tawaifs, the chai, the pan and all that, and the snacks and all that, the gatherings. So great ustads used to all gather there. And let's say a young artist was playing, and some senior musician didn't approve of it, let's say. Either if he approved, he would be blessed, and beta bahut acha baja rahe ho, रियाज चालू रखना बेटा, और फिर सुनाओ मुझे 6 जुम्मे के बाद. नो, they used to say, फिर से आना 10 जुम्मे के बाद फिर से सुनेंगे. After another 10 Fridays we'll listen. Or if there was something that he didn't play correct, they would say, बेटा रुक जाओ. They would stop the artist and say, ये इसका निकास फिर से बजाओ. And they would see the निकास, ये तो सही नहीं, कौन है तुम्हारे उस्ताद? So he would say, let's say if his ustad was there in the gathering, he would say so. So the ustad would be told respectfully that please see that so and so this thing is corrected. And beta, you come again after 4 Jummas or 6 Jummas. We'll listen to you again. Play the same thing again. So there was quality control.
Wow.
So young musicians, and what to say, these were wonderful settings for nurturing of young talent and ensuring authenticity with their approval or disapproval, and quality control, though I said. But again, in something interesting used to happen. For the sake of art, there used to also be severe differences sometimes between two great maestros, differences of opinion. And that used to get resolved then and there in the presence of all musicians, if there were differences. So the differences were never personal rivalries. They were for the sake of the art. So heated arguments took place for the sake of art, not personal rivalries. So this is how these dangals played a very, very important role in quality control, and for the correct material to come out till us, till you and me. If we are blessed and lucky to have received authentic material, it is because of this quality control by the great ustads that we received those things in correct shape and in pure form. So I'll tell you about some stories about dangals. My father himself was a part of a dangal. Ustad Amir Hussain Khan Sahab used to always take my father along and said, "Beta, tum mere saath kal Jumma hai, mere saath chalo." My father used to feel a little awkward and little out of place in such a scenario, but he it was the ustad's order, so he went with him like his son, right behind him. And seeing the whole gathering, my father used to say that he learned so much from these gatherings, not only these happenings, these arguments, these approvals, disapprovals, but even etiquette, because the tawaifs would sit behind netted pardas, and with their Bangla ghunta bole, Hindi te ki bole, सिर पे वो चादर लगा के, क्या कहते हैं उससे, जो भी है, तो
घूंघट
देवी घूंघट लगा के, करेक्ट, they would sit there behind the netted pardas, and if a young artist like my father, if he played very well, and if it was fully approved by the whole crowd, the senior musicians and everyone, and even the tawaifs inside, the mother tawaif, the chief, would come out and bless the young artist, or with a currency note would do nazar nikalna, moving it round the head, and so that no evil eye comes on you, and or a garland of notes, currency notes, if they were very happy with a performance. And such dangals happened also where Amir Hussain Khan Sahab had differences with another great, I don't want to name him, another great and highly respected tabla player of Delhi Gharana. Had some differences. So he sent his son, Papa Mia, I'll talk to you about Papa Mia also, all the way to Malad where my father was. And Papa Mia said, भैया आज जाना है, बाबा ने बुलाया वहाँ, जुम्मे का दंगल आज है. So they both went there, and it was found out that there was some differences between the two senior most maestros, and that was for that Amir Hussain Khan had called my father to play. Why? Because Amir Hussain Khan there were some differences with that other great maestro, and Amir Hussain Khan Sahab said, you people hide your art, why don't you teach it to everyone? Otherwise this art will go to the grave with you, because that particular gharana or that family of maestros were known, reputed not to teach anyone outside the family. So Amir Hussain Khan Sahab said that I differ with you on this. You are not doing justice to this art. You must teach it to others. So see my disciples. I have so many disciples. And that's how he called my father. And my father performed and got the approval of everyone there, and so on. So this was, there are many stories about my father's participation in dangals. But I'll tell you another dangal story. There was a Guru Bhai of Ahmad Jan Tirakwa. His name was Nazir Khan. Nazir Khan of Panipat. He was also a disciple of Munir Khan Sahab, Guru Bhai of Ahmad Jan Tirakwa. Once after a year with Talim, he went back to his hometown, I think Panipat. And he practiced for quite a few years. Aisa riyaz kiya, and he came back and performed at such a dangal, where Tirakwa Khan Sahab was also present, and played so powerful that Tirakwa Khan Sahab said it was something shockingly fantastic performance. And when he played, it started this way. Khan Sahab said कि भाई नजीर खान, हमने सुना खूब रियाज कर रहे हो आजकल, भाई सुनना है तुम्हारा तबला. तो do you know what the answer was? भाई चाहो तो सुन लो, सुनवा लो, चाहे तो सुन लो, सुनवा लो. That was a challenge. There is a hidden challenge behind it. If you want, you listen or get an audience to listen to me. So it was a challenge. There's an echo coming.
Yeah.
Or I'm speaking. Probably somebody's speaker is on, I think. Okay. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, Kaka.
Okay. So, चाहो तो सुन लो, सुनवा लो. So that was the challenge. And then Nazir Khan played, and it was amazing. It was just out of the world. Tirakwa Khan Sahab felt that if he kept quiet now, it would be mistaken as him accepting defeat. So he had to play. So he took the tabla and just called for his guru in his mind and played a tabla started performing. The very moment he started, the others in the audience, all other tabla players in the audience, it just came out naturally from some senior tabla player. Tabla to ab shuru hua.
Ah,
So this was, Khan Sahab used to always say, this was nothing but his guru's blessings that worked at that difficult moment. It was a very challenging moment. Similarly, there are stories about dangals between Tirkwa Khan Sahab and Habibuddin Khan Sahab. Habibuddin Khan Sahab once came to Bombay and played in a dangal for 4 hours, tabla solo, and finished at a super fast speed, at that speed, playing tukdas one after the other, and his hand was like it was on fire. And there were other musicians in the gathering who told Tirkwa Khan Sahab, why not you now? After Habibuddin Khan finished, he said, Bhai Amajan Khan, abhi thoda aapka bhi sunayenge, bole. So that was not a right thing to suggest, because the atmosphere was heated and warmed up by Habibuddin's fiery tabla playing. So Tirkwa Khan Sahab then felt, okay, if this was being suggested, he cannot keep quiet. He'll have to do something about it. So he took the same pair of tabla, and he told the sarangi player, "Jahan khatam kiya, usi lay se shuru karo."
oh my God.
So
My God.
the lehra, the nagma, had to start from that speed where Habibuddin Khan finished his solo. And needless to say, Tirkwa Khan Sahab managed to create a very strong impact and win over the situation. Again, he used to always credit his guru for this. He used to say, "Mere guru ke duaएं से ही ये सब जो हुआ मेरे जिंदगी में." He used to always credit everything to his guru. So these are about dangals.
So enlightening and so you described so vividly. We could visualize actually the situation.
Fantastic.
Thank you, thank you so much. And
Most
please,
welcome.
Anirban, carry on.
Sure. So I'll come to a different subject here, Kaku.
Yeah.
So all musicians, rather instrumentalists, for them, the most important thing is the instrument itself, the instrument that they play. The process of making instruments, the people, the tools, and the technology involved that we have in our country, I would say, if you compare that to our Western counterparts, our ways of making things are still pretty outdated and non-standard, not standardized adequately.
Yeah.
So, what, in your opinion, is the way forward, basically, to improve on this aspect? Because we have, for example, Hemen Shen as a fantastic Sarod maker.
Yeah.
But after him, we have others. But the thing is that in most cases we see that these skills basically come to an end with the person. So how do we retain and improve on that?
Yes, very nice question. And in today's times, it is extremely relevant and important to address this problem. The thing is, in instrument making, also there have been traditional families.
Right.
From father to son to grandson, it has, evolved and continued. The idea of making musical instruments, there was no scientific formula all along. It was purely experience by trial and error that they made instruments, and no guarantee that if 10 sitars were made, all 10 wouldn't be the same. Maybe 2 or 3 would be really outstanding, and others will be fairly average or not good.
Correct.
So that is because of what is called haath ka andaz.
Correct. Yeah.
They used to make it by haath ka andaz and no scientific formula. So times have changed,
Yeah.
And this art or craft of instrument making needs to come out of these
Indeed.
families also, and
Exactly.
help the future generation of these families, and also be available to younger educated students, those who
Exactly.
have a bent of mind for restoration, for renovation, for laboratory work, you know. So a modern approach has begun, of course. It has begun,
Correct.
but much more thought is required.
Exactly.
Scientific methods have to come about. Formulas have to be made,
Correct. And I believe,
and that way, what will happen is at least one thing will get is standardization and quality assurance.
correct.
There'll be a quality assurance. You know, an instrument maker himself will know, okay, I'm going to make this. He will know at the end this instrument, how is it going to turn out? What will be the sound? Even before he has completed making it, he can visualize that.
Exactly.
So
Actually,
that
there is some physics involved in this. Actually, basically,
absolutely,
now, and we have fantastic technological institutions in our country, which can, I mean, if they want, choose to work with this craftsmen. This, I mean, these people who have been making these instruments over generations, and
right.
try to, I mean, put together some sort of a, a process which is more standardized, and
Yeah,
that's what.
it needs to start without any
Yeah,
further delay in
exactly.
India. If the West can do such a fantastic job, they make 50 violins or 100 violins, and almost all are identical.
Exactly.
If they can
Exactly.
do it, why we can't do it? We can do it. It
Yeah.
needs more scientific minded people to
Indeed.
take up this, because this again takes a full lifetime.
Absolutely.
But at the end, remember one thing: there is something called master's touch.
Absolutely.
A Hiren Roy sitar, or a
Indeed.
Stradivarius violin,
Violin.
or a Human
Absolutely.
Roy Sarod, it can never be duplicated by another person.
That's
That is a master's touch. But however, we can have more masters,
true. Right. Indeed.
and yes, let's pray that even this becomes an important field for exploration
Right.
and for further research. It should happen.
Uh, so before I move over to my last question, pretty much, Rupak, do you have any additional queries from your side? You are most
Actually,
welcome.
actually, I do have so many things. I was about to, but Kaku must be very
No, no, no. That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. I have late dinner.
because we are uh,
Well, since we
so
are on the
I
subject, let's give all justice to it.
yeah we are. I had a question to ask you. That is,
Please.
there are a lot of confusions in terminologies are still out there. Students often confuse between chalan and kaida. To be very specific, gath and tukra, rela kaida, or gath chalan,
Yeah.
gath kaida, to name a few. There are so many terms out there. And
Yeah.
besides, most of the traditional bandises, most of
Yeah.
them, if not the most, at least 25% of the bandishes in case of vocal music are well documented by Vatkandeji and so many others in the field of
Yeah.
North Indian vocals, especially. But in contrast, unfortunately, we often observe confusions are prevailing in the name of original composer. In addition, variants of particular compositions are being played and taught here and there. Do you feel the need of standardization and proper documentation of the art form
Well, I'll tell you like
in a
that.
holistic
Basically,
approach?
if we are talking about tabla, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Standardization has already been there. Every class of composition, classification, category, they are already very clearly well defined. One can easily identify what is a kaida, what is a rela, what is a gat, what is a tukda, So these things are pretty clear. But then one must know that also there are things like varieties. For example, kaida is just not a kaida. Kaida and Rela, the basic difference is Rela is supposed to be finely woven, many more syllables that come into play, so that when it is played at a fast speed, it has to be played at fast speed, then it creates a drone effect. That's the purpose of a Rela. Whereas the purpose of a Kaida is different. It's a poem. You're reciting a poem. The Kaida is like a poem. It's like a shairi. So it goes from one stanza to another to another, So Kaida is a shairi. But Rela is to create a drone, a musical effect. Now, even in Kaidas, there are many kinds of Kaidas. So Gat Ang Kaida is one important. Gat Ang, that means, which is originally a Gat, but has room for unfolding or elaboration, like a Kaida. So therefore it is Gat Ang Kaida. Yani Kaida jiska Ang Gat jaisa hai, which the body is like a Gat, but it can be elaborated. So Gat Ang Kaida. Like that, there are 4 kinds of Kaidas. Then there are many kinds of Gats. Sometimes, of course, there are tricky compositions, difficult to classify. For example, sometimes a Gat and a Tukda is hard, sometimes very hard to. Basically, Gat is like a poem which has not only contrasting sounds in it, but also a rhyming in it. So, whereas Tukda is like a Gat, but with an additional Tihai at the end. Gat does not necessarily have a Tihai. Rarely there are. But by and large, Gats are just body, just a literary body. And Tukda has a Tihai also. Then the size of the Tukda depends. If it is a smaller Tukda, it's called Mohra. Mohra, a very small Tukda. For example, a small Tukda. And even small, which is like starting before you start a composition or a theka. This is called Mukhada. Mukhada means face. Mukhada. So you show the face. Or so this is a Mukhada. So Mukhada, Mohra, Tukda, one has to know the differences. And Gat. Then Gats, as I said some time back, there are 52 prakars. There is Sida Gat, there is Dupalli Gat, Tripalli Gat, Chaupalli Gat, Dodhara Gat, Tridhara Gat, Chaudhara Gat, Genduchal Gat, we did some time back, Bagar Dhaka Gat. There are so many, Uchat Samet Gat, Rishtedari Gat. There are many kinds of Gats. They come by different names, and the composition itself tells you what it is. So, for example, nowadays I hear some people saying Kaida Rela. There is nothing called Kaida Rela. It's either a Kaida or a Rela. There is nothing called Kaida Rela. Gat Kaida, yes. Gat Ang Kaida. Gat Ang Kaida. Kaida which has the body of a Gat. Then there are many kinds of Kaidas, as I said some time back. Few tricky compositions are there. Difficult to decide. So also then there are difficult to categorize, tricky ones. But if you have a good repertoire, then you can identify what it is. Number one. The other thing is, Farrukhabad is famous for its chalans. What is a chalan? Always, many tabla players ask me, what is a chalan? Chalan is something, it has the elements of a Kaida, the elements of Rela, the elements of Gat also in it. And you clearly can't put it in any one of these categories. You can't classify it as a Kaida or a Gat or a Rela. And these are called chalans. For example, again this language is so important. What a beautiful language. I'll say it slower. This is a challenge. These are Farukhabadi challenges.
So we
Yeah.
had
Thank you so much.
absolutely breathtaking, interesting, as well as intensive conversation with you, Kaku. And we can't just believe, how the time flew by.
Absolutely.
So,
It is already 2.5
kind
hours.
of the concluding question on
feel
my
away.
part is, apart from being a prolific performing artist, you have a great command over language and expressions also. So have you ever thought of doing anything leveraging this faculty of yours, maybe writing for the musical fraternity, or maybe writing an autobiography for yourself?
Actually, the first person to suggest this to me was your father, my Guruji, Pandit Buddhadev Dasgupta ji. He told me, Nayan, you have a lot of information, lot of music, lot of anecdotes, lot of interesting experiences. You must write a book. He told me time and again. It comes echoing in my mind even now. Then I said, Dada, you are seeing I'm so, so held up. My hands are so full. Already a double career of tabla and sitar, and then managing an institution, and then helping with the encyclopedia, and teaching and touring and so on. So he said, no, you keep a dictaphone or a kind of a recording machine in your pocket. And at the moment you start discussing this with anyone, or even when you're alone, solitude, you want to speak your mind or just record it. It can all be, brought together later and made into a book. Well, I've started in bits and pieces.
Great.
But there's a long way to go. I really need to devote much more time to this. And I know that whatever I share, I'm already blessed with all these experiences. I feel very blessed, and I wish I can share this so that it becomes beneficial for coming generations.
Indeed, absolutely. So, on a parting note, I would like to thank all the listeners, viewers, musicians, music students, enthusiasts who had been here with us for the last few hours.
I have a few observations or
Sure.
something more to share. Just a couple of minutes more.
Sure.
Yeah.
See, Rupak, I'm addressing this to you because tabla art has always been very rich and very varied, very colorful. And contributions by practitioners have happened in every generation, right? Even today it's going on, And it is very vital to include many styles in a tabla performance to make it rich and complete and give it expression and, serve the purpose of it. As I said sometime back, tabla was not just percussion, it was music making. The joy of melodic music and emotions should be considered in a tabla performance. And tabla has both elements. It can create excitement. It can make the listener sit on the edge of the seat in wonder of the speed and power, etc. But there is also another side where subconsciously the listener shuts his eyes and feels like a dream. He's transported into a different realm. That can happen with tabla. It has happened with the tabla of Amir Hussain Khan and my father. There have been many occasions when I felt like in a trance. Tabla creating trance is different. It's very difficult because tabla people generally know is only to create excitement. It's not so. It's a much larger art. It's an experience. Tabla is not just percussion instrument. It's not just a concert instrument. It's not just for performances. It is something much more. Tabla can it's an experience. It can open a new life, a new universe. This is what I wanted to tell about tabla, and for that I need to also talk about three great masters: Ahmadjan Therakwa, Amir Hussain Khan, and Gyan Prakash Ghosh, and also my father. A lot of young tabla players do ask me, since they missed out on meeting these people, what was it like seeing Ahmadjan Therakwa, for example. Ahmadjan Therakwa, when you listen to the tabla and you'll see his photographs and you listen to him on YouTube, you can feel what a regal, what a majestic style he had. Yet, let me tell you, he was very modern for his times. There were older tabla players who did not easily approve of his modern approach. And you can see that in his, I'll give you one example. What would any tabla player do? He would elaborate by go to, step by step. He went to the last variation because that has the maximum juice. It was very juicy. So what he did, what is played at the very end, he played it very well. So he broke the concept of silsila for the sake of art. So he was very modern in his times.
Indeed.
And of course, his sound production was unmatched and remains unmatched till today. His incredible span of his career, over 80 years, just imagine, performing career of 80 years plus. And he used to be so immersed in his...
Beyond our imagination.
He used to be so immersed in his art 24/7. I'll tell you, even when he was sleeping, very often it happened, I was in the adjacent room, and in the middle of the night, I felt he was calling me. So I would go in the dark and just see what's happening. Is he calling me? But Therakwa Khan Sahab, no. And he was already snoring, and in the middle of his snoring, he was reciting some tabla composition or singing a beautiful thumri or a khayal. And maybe not the whole thing, maybe just a line, and then again it continued snoring. What a soaked musician, what a completely realized musician. He had a stiff exterior, but he was a very warm-hearted person and very jovial. And imagine, I feel so blessed that I saw him like this 24/7 for a decade. And then on top of it, to receive guidance and material and making me practice, making me realize what is called riyaz. He used to do riyaz with me. When I was 12, 13, 14, 15, he was 90, 91, 92, and he used to make me do 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours of riyaz, and he would practice also. I can't be more blessed than this. Then talking about my father, he was a totally soaked musician, totally soaked. He was an artist at heart. Melody and tabla was part of his breathing. But at the same time, he was a karma yogi. He utilized all his time to realize the music and propagate it in so many different ways. I really owe my entire musical existence to him. Ustad Amir Hussain Khan, one of the greatest composers, perhaps the most outstanding composer of all times. What a high degree of sophistication, refinement, aesthetics, so artistically so fulfilling that today his compositions are knowingly or unknowingly played by tabla players across gharanas. Ustad Hashmat Ali Khan, who passed away recently in Delhi, Akram Bhai's father, he used to say, Amir Hussain Khan Sahab was a banayak, batayak, or bajayak. He composed thousands of compositions as a composer. Bajayak, so tayyar, so convincing. and bataya, teaching so many disciples. And here I'll tell you something interesting. His tabla, if you listen to his records, it starts with rela at a high speed. He never played peshkar. A lot of people used to ask him. He was a very shy and modest person, but he would just shyly say that peshkar is for those who need to warm up their hands. Peshkar उनको बजाना पड़ता है जिनको हाथ गरम करना पड़ता है. His hand was like a race horse, always ready. Then talking about Gurudev Gyan Prakash Ghosh, an institution in himself, melodically, tabla wise.
Absolutely.
What a reservoir he created, huge, of his own original compositions. So vast, so rich, and widely disseminated. So widely disseminated that one can easily call it the Gyan Prakash Ghosh Gharana today.
Indeed, without any doubt.
Yeah. And his tabla, one thing unique about his tabla compositions was that, they had a beautiful blend of Farrukhabad and Punjab. Obviously, Farrukhabad because his Ustad was Masjid Khan Sahab, and Punjab, Firoz Khan Sahab. So his own compositions had a beautiful blend of these two flavors, and never before did this happen in tabla. It was Gyan Babu who brought this. And also, he incorporated mathematical structure so aesthetically, and the dynamics were so intellectual, the dynamics of the bowls. I mean, his compositions are perhaps the most futuristic in shape, in construction. Anyway, then his compositions, I felt some compositions used to be like a storytelling. Rupak, you must be knowing Taket Di Nagena Dagi. What a composition!
I was there when Buddhadev was requesting me you to play the composition.
In every solo of mine, wherever Buddhadev was sitting in the audience, he would always make this farmaish. And look at the composition. It's like as if someone is telling a story. Taket Di Nagena Dagi, Taket Takata Gadi. Taket Di Nagena Dagi, Taket Takata Gadi. What a composition. I was very blessed. Me, my brother, my sister, that interaction between him and my father, it was like food for our musical growth, And I want to tell before we end that these people, they were not ordinary human beings. They were highly evolved and deeply realized musicians.
Indeed.
What you will understand if I say they were Siddha Purush. The concert was not the end for them.
Exactly.
It was a realization far beyond concertizing. It was hard to say, find words.
Indeed.
And these were the great permanent saints of music. The rishis. Yeah.
Indeed, Kaku. Absolutely
Your
no
words,
words to thank you.
Like lesson, lifetime lesson for us.
Indeed, and I'm sure all the listeners and viewers who were with us for the past few hours, they will remember this experience for a long, long time in their life. And for having this opportunity to take a peek into the treasure trove of your experiences, your realizations, and your thoughts. So no words to thank you, and pranams to you.
Thank you.
As a humble student of music and on behalf of HUM Nishad.
I really appreciate the initiative that you, Anirban and Rupak, have taken together. And if such discussions can help younger musicians, then our purpose is served.
Indeed. And we intend to have these interviews preserved for everyone to see.
In our archival form. Absolutely.
Thank you.
That was our
Thank you.
prime intention. Yeah.
Thank you, because it's nothing but the same message of all these great masters that I'm carrying forward, and I'm enjoying sharing it with coming generations, with all of you. It is nothing but their message.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.